The former Israeli diplomat, now commentator for Haaretz, wrote this week that there had been 3 significant visits in the Israel-US relationship. There was the visit that wasn't and isn't, the visit that is actually taking place, and the visit that really matters. And that was a visit that lasted an hour and a quarter in the Oval Office on Tuesday. It was between President Joe Biden and the 3-time Pulitzer Prize winner and New York Times columnist, and our guest now on Unholy, friend of the podcast, Tom Friedman. Tom, thanks so much for being with us on Unholy. You've been with us before, but so great to have you again. I think just before we get into the content of what you talked about, the significance of the fact that you were asked to come and see the president, this is not an experience that happens to most journalists. I think it's fair to say that they're not often called in to see the most powerful office holder in the world. Just talk us through the mechanics of that, the actual dynamic of you being in there, you and him, that relationship, before we get into actually the specifics of this encounter.
Well, it's great to be with you, Johnny, and Yonit. There's some things I probably can't or won't talk about. Let me start from 30,000 feet, though. Something I realized this week. What's going on in Israel is really the most, I think, significant democracy promotion initiative, grassroots, that I've ever covered. I mean, I covered Occupy Central. I was in Tahrir Square. I was in the Maidan after. I was in Taksim Square. But I've never seen something 28 weeks in a row. And it is a remarkable thing. And I think the stakes are enormous for a country that I care deeply about, whose fate and future I care deeply about. I realized something this week when I got an email from a senior Israeli diplomat around the world after my column. It was on a Gmail account, and it just said 2 words: "Thank you. Thank you." That meant a lot to me.
I can see, we can both see that you're holding back some emotion there, Tom, as you talk about this.
These people and what they're doing is remarkable, but they have no ambassador. There's no Israeli embassy in Washington that's speaking up for them, that's explaining to American diplomats what they're doing. They have no ambassador. They have no American Jewish organization speaking up for them, speaking proudly of this amazing democracy movement. No one's speaking for them. And yet they show up every 28 weeks in a row. It's remarkable. And so I didn't start out doing this. I'm just a columnist, but what I've tried to do is, in my own little way, and please don't take this any way other than a little way, I've tried to be their ambassador here, to explain to people why this is important. And it's not easy, because the inertia and the power of the entrenched forces are either neutral or quietly opposed. And when administration officials are caught up in that network, of things, it's sometimes very hard for them to get out of it and actually get the real perspective, because no one's explaining it to them, and we must talk nicely to Netanyahu, and we must do this, And so, because I'm not tied into any of these things, and I did turn 70 today. I just don't care what you say about me. And because I've been doing this a long time, I know where the bodies are buried. I know every game, every play Netanyahu has ran. And I have decided for myself, I'm going to do everything I can to alert people to just what's going on. I fortunately have a long relationship with President Biden, and I have enormous affection and respect for him, and I think it's requited. So that's 30,000 feet what's going on. From ground level, basically, because I'm tied into a lot of networks, so I watched what happened. My phone blew up. And one of the calls was from, I don't think you'll mind me saying, my dear friend Yochanan Plessner, who runs the Israel Democracy Institute, who said to me, Tom, what happened? Biden just called Bibi, and Bibi came out and they issued a picture of him smiling ear to ear, talking to the president. And Bibi said, I told the president, we're just going to get through this reasonableness thing. And after that, I'll really try to pull the country together. And I'm thinking, holy mackerel, what are you talking about? That can't be. So I sent an email to a very senior administration official, attentioning him to how this story was being manipulated in Israel, because I knew what was going on. I mean, without even knowing it, I knew what Bibi was doing, and the White House hadn't issued a statement yet. So they came to realize what was going on. They issued a very clear statement that said Bibi, the president said, we'll meet sometime in the future, and reaffirmed Biden's position that this should be done through consensus, and that was what he told Netanyahu. But White House statements they're not like, it's not like a headline in The Guardian or the New York Times. I mean, they go into the ether kind of thing. So just to tell you the whole story, by pure I was invited to the state dinner between Modi and Biden, I don't know, 2.5 weeks ago, and spoke to the president there. And I told him at that dinner how proud I was to have him as my president, speaking up and standing up for the democracy movement in Israel. And I wanted him to know how many people there appreciate it. And he did not know this, but I told him, do you realize how many Israelis are carrying signs in those demonstrations that say, Biden, save us? So I just wanted him to know that. Anyways, he said, hey, let's get together and talk more about that, the Saudi thing, the world, and which we do, from time to time. I said, I'd love to. And this is the real truth, I'll confess to it, by pure accident, the meeting was scheduled an hour after Herzog left the White House. This was set up a week ago, okay? And it certainly wasn't set up then consciously, well, Herzog will leave, then we'll go here, and then we'll talk. It was just like, that's when it happened. Mm-hmm. But, when in our business, when the door opens, you better walk through it. And so I prepped for that meeting by sharing, with my friends there, what was going on in Israel. How Netanyahu and Hanegbi were trying to spin this story, And again, I won't go any deeper into it, but they weren't amused. Joe Biden's a very doughy guy, but don't underestimate him. He is nobody's fool. And if you think he's out of it, you are exactly wrong. Okay. No, he can't play, 4 sets of tennis these days, I'm sure, but his mind is like totally on it. And so when I got to the Oval Office, they already had a statement written waiting for me. That quote, the on the record quote part of it, which they handed to me when I sat down, and then we talked, Joe Biden is an authentic, it is Kishkes, lover of Israel. And and his deep affection for the Jewish people. He wears it on his sleeve. He's very concerned about anti-Semitism, what that could mean, for Jews around the world. And he's not anti-Netanyahu. He considers him a friend still. But really? I wouldn't say otherwise. If it's otherwise, I'd let him say it. Mm-hmm. But he wanted everyone to know exactly where he stood, which is only do a huge constitution, even though Israel doesn't have a constitution, judicial overhaul of this nature, if you have a national consensus. We don't do constitutional amendments in this country by pushing them through in a few weeks with no expert witnesses and trying to change the Constitution. And the president, God bless his heart, wanted to make sure that I understood that and wanted to make sure I shared that view with the world. And that's where it came from.
First of all, we're not going to let it slip that it's your birthday today, which you mentioned. And I'm going to say nothing says happy birthday more than talking to two Jews on a podcast. But happy birthday. But I want to connect to that quote that that kind of changed everything. Because as you said, the readouts that the Netanyahu office came out with after this conversation was entirely different. And the quote that you brought of President Biden said, among other things, please stop now, don't pass anything important without broad consensus, or you're going to break something with Israel's democracy and with your relationship with America's democracy, and you may never be able to get it back. What is that thing relating to American democracy, that break with America that you fear, that he fears, rather, that Israel won't be able to get back?
That you have an independent judiciary, and any changes to that are done through a broad-based consensus. And the independent judiciary matters a lot to American officials because we're asked to go to the World Court and defend Israel, sometimes Israeli pilots or commanders, on the assumption, the argument the United States uses is Israel has an independent judiciary that can bring to account lawbreakers in civil society and in the military. So you, the World Court, don't need to get involved in this because we can vouch for the fact, and we will protect Israel for the fact that it has an independent, credible judiciary. And if that is not the case anymore, how is the U.S. going to go to the World Court? This is the President of the United States. He's not the President of Israel. So he can only do so much. He went remarkably far, in what he said. But I also respect the fact that he's dealing with China. And the minute he's done with this, and so the fact that he devoted as much as he did, and I would say 90% of the hour and 15 minutes I was there, we did talk about Israel and this issue, but we also talked about China and Ukraine and other things as well, because I have to cover those in my spare time. But they now are totally up on what is going on. But again, there's a weight to these relationships. The president is not a columnist. He can't just say, I'm just going to focus on this. We're engaged with Israel. That's part of a dialogue with Saudi Arabia. We're engaged with Israel, which is part of a strategic dialogue with Iran. As I've always tried to make clear in my columns, the intelligence sharing relationship, the military sharing relationship with Israel is as strong, if not stronger than ever, because it goes through a completely different set of channels. And so it makes me appreciate all the more the willingness and ability of the president to extract himself from this web of relationships, the weight of which is to really not rock the boat, and for him to just stand up and with both feet rock the boat. People don't appreciate, I think, how big a deal that was. Oh, Israelis got it because of the way it played in Israel, but I think Netanyahu is one of the most clever, most effective liars in global politics today. if you notice who he gives interviews to, it's only people who don't know the true texture of the story, and that you can't.
Not to Israeli journalists.
Oh, exactly. And so he's such a sophisticated liar too. Unless you're paying close attention and you know every fiber of the story, you won't get it.
But then, if this is the situation, why give Netanyahu in the first place this gift in the form of a conversation? Obviously, he's not being invited yet, and for a long time he hasn't been. But it's still a sort of a gift to say, let's talk on the phone for 15 minutes. Yeah.
I don't know this for a fact, so don't take this the wrong way. I have a feeling that maybe the president of Israel suggested that it would be a heck of a lot easier for me in Washington if, this situation where you'll only talk to me, but you won't talk to him, that's a problem, for the president. And I understand that, I can see why. And so I think, and it's also for Biden, I think it was, let's get this off the table. I mean, it had become a thing, that he wasn't inviting him and wasn't talking to him. And I think he just wanted to deflate that issue so we could go back and focus on the substance. You know what I mean? And no, I'll talk to him and I'll tell him just what I think. And by the way, I'm actually for inviting Bibi to Washington right now, machar, but on the condition that he know in advance. I'm just asking you two questions. Are you dismantling the judiciary? Are you not? And are you annexing the West Bank, or are you occupying the West Bank pending negotiations? And I want to have a press conference, and I'm going to pose those two questions for you. Otherwise, come, wonderful. We'll have a party on the White House lawn, you and Sarah, Jill and me. But the price of admission is those two questions in public.
What came through in your column, Tom, very loud and clear, was, I thought, the president's frustration with this situation. It breaks his heart, which, as you say, he wears on his sleeve when it comes to Israel. The bit that was missing from my reading of it was the sanction, the threat for Netanyahu if he goes ahead with this. Now, you've been covering this long enough to know that it's not beyond the bounds of reality for American presidents to use their leverage. Bush Sr., with Shamir government, the withholding of loan guarantees, 10 billion worth, unless Israel did, in that case, what the Bush administration then wanted. Why, first of all, in your conversation with him, was there any stick to go with the words from Biden? And if so, what is that threat that might be hanging over Netanyahu? Because as you've been making very clear, he and his government, the Ben-Gvirs and Smotriches, they don't play by Marquis of Queensberry rules. A heartbroken statement from the Oval Office, albeit delivered by you, doesn't make them change. Only a threat might make them change. So did you hear any of that?
Yeah, I think those days are over, John, where U.S. administrations will do that for a very simple reason. That was true in the Cold War when the stakes were much higher, the strategic stakes for America. Don't take this the wrong way, but we just don't care enough anymore. Oh, you want to commit suicide? Gosh, that's really too bad. We wish you wouldn't do that. But it's very hard in this case when it involves an internal Israeli issue. When it's Israeli-Palestinian, then you can at least imagine that. But when it's an internal issue, no American administration has ever had to face that. It was about settlements. It was about things like that. Now that,
although as you've explained, these things are interrelated, and the one could lead to the other.
But I told a senior administration official I wanted to do a column one day. I don't know if you actually catalog U.S. State Department statements about Israeli settlement activity in the West Bank, how many times they've used the term "we are troubled" or "we are." Are you ready? Are you both sitting down? We are deeply troubled. Okay, we are deeply troubled, and it's just become a joke. So I actually was fantasizing with one of them. How about you let me write the statement one day? I'll give you trouble. Okay, and believe me, it was met with great enthusiasm. But again, you have to look at this from now a really 30,000 foot geostrategic view. Our relationship with China is unraveling. Our relationship with Russia has unraveled. The president's dealing with some giant tectonic plates. So whether there are 1,000 more Israeli settler homes or not, that's something that it's very unlikely that he's going to bring the wood out for, because the political downside is big. The political upside is not he knows where the base of his party is. Joe Biden is so much to the right of the base of the Democratic Party, it isn't even funny. You know what I mean? So
on Israel, you mean?
On Israel, yeah. So the stakes are just not big enough. We don't care. You know, the Middle East just isn't what it was for us in the Cold War. So why pay a political price? My feeling is we should just say to Israel, you know, I mean, you're on your own. You want to settle the whole West Bank? Do it, but don't call us. This is the tragedy for Israel now. We just don't care enough. You know, hey, if we're out of words. If this is what you want to do, if this is how you want to commit suicide, I'm going to tell you I'm deeply troubled. But I'm not going to pay the political costs of stopping you, because that's an endless kind of game, and we can't plug that dike. And you're an elected government, and this is what you want to do. That, by the way, that's the real danger for Israel. It's not that we care too much; it's that we care too little. And this judicial thing, only because more than half of Israel is behind it, and it touches the core of the relationship. That's why it's drawn the attention it has.
But that's exactly the point. I mean, even before the judicial overhaul entered our lives, you know, Israel had a problem. This is, of course, exacerbated by the makeup of this government with Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. And I wonder even if you know, the protest movement that you're very, attached to, many Israelis are, it succeeds, and the judicial overhaul is halts. What does the relationship look like between both countries in a decade or in 5 years?
Who could have imagined this? Okay, the king of Saudi, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, wants a whole new strategic relationship with the United States. He wants a civil nuclear program. He wants the most advanced weapon we have, and a NATO-like security treaty between our two countries. Part of his effort to persuade us is, if you do that, you all know this, I will normalize relations with Israel, provided Israel gives me some cover on the Palestinians, undetermined what that is, okay? This administration is weighing doing that. This is a very serious matter, okay? But it would require some level of congressional approval. Now, if I were ranking the popularity of world leaders among the base of the Democratic Party, the progressive caucus, I'm pretty sure that it's a competition between who would be last, Netanyahu or MBS, okay? Well, isn't this interesting? For Israel to get normalized relations with Saudi Arabia, for America to have a new relationship with Saudi Arabia, it will require a Democratic president and the Democratic base of the Democratic Party. Only Joe Biden can deliver this. By the way, if it were Trump, God forbid, or another Republican president, the number of votes you'd get for this from the base of the Democratic Party, the Democratic caucus, would be between 0 and 1, okay? So only Joe Biden and only the base of the Democratic Party can deliver this. Huge deal, okay? And who did Bibi Netanyahu and Ron Dermer spend a decade telling to go to hell? Because we don't need you. We didn't tell you. Israel's a Republican cause. Oh, we didn't tell you. Oh, and by the way, who needs Jews? They're all going to intermarry. We have evangelicals. Well, where are they now? The cunning of history, sometimes you just have to sit back and really enjoy the show. So right now, the biggest strategic initiative to remake the Middle East depends on AOC, MBS, Bibi, meet AOC. And I must say, if it weren't more serious, I would pop popcorn, put up my seat, put up my shoes, and just watch the show. This is so delicious for anyone who's been following this story.
Because your point here is they would need Congress's blessing for any kind of deal. I just want to press the point about what sanctions there are there. I take fully your point about, in a way, for whatever Biden's personal feelings, strategically, the United States no longer cares the way it did. But Yonit mentioned that intelligence cooperation, that relationship, which goes on almost regardless of the politics. Obviously, there's Iron Dome. That's a huge degree of dependency the Israelis have for their own security. Are you saying that even if, as you and others have been warning, Israel goes the way of Erdogan's Turkey and Orban's Hungary, the United States continues to keep the Iron Dome going, continues to supply the intelligence cooperation, acts as if Israel were the Israel of before, and apart from a few, as it were, sort of tear-stained interviews like the one Biden gave you, actually nothing changes?
Johnny, after 40 years of following this thing, I'd be hard-pressed to predict otherwise. The weight and inertia of those relationships is so strong. And I'm not sure I'm advocating that it should change. I mean, these are deep security matters for which both sides have benefit. But I think where this will start to fray is if Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and their friends are successful in dismantling Oslo, it will start to affect Jordan and Egypt. Jordan in particular. Jordan's stability is a national security interest of the United States. By the way, it's a national security interest of Israel as well. And it will start to affect Jordan. It's already affected the Abraham Accords. Everyone's taken a step back. The Negev Forum, I think, was postponed, and so I'm not here to tell you that the Arab states care more about the Palestinians than they do. They couldn't care less. But their populations do, and they do care at some emotional level. And so that's kind of how I see it. But the base of the Democratic Party really matters. And if you want to know where the base of the Democratic Party is, just read what the statement, which I thought was appalling, because I don't think it's true, by the head of the Democratic caucus in the House of Representatives, which represents basically 50% of all Democratic congressmen and women. And she said Israel was a racist state. Now, she apologized for that, took it back, but it just shows you the mood down there. By the way, Bernie Sanders didn't attend Herzog's speech. I mean, there are people here just fed up with the whole thing. But for Joe Biden, if you actually took a vote in the Democratic Party, I mean, by the way, I had two senators call me, two very important senators call me before I went to see Biden, because they knew I was going to see him, to lobby me, and it was not on Netanyahu's behalf. So they're on very thin ice, with this party, and it's kind of interesting, that there aren't even more Republicans trying to take advantage of this tension. Yes, Ted Cruz, Tom Cotton, these knuckleheads, Biden's anti-Semitic, but it's not like Republicans are out throwing their body in the way of, to protect Netanyahu. I mean, it's even that has to do with the isolationist mood that's infected the Republican Party. I mean, these are people who don't want to support Zelensky. So, so you've got and Biden knows that American Jews are with him, the vast majority. He knows American public's with him on this. He feels no concerns. That's why he's so comfortable talking about it. I mean, he knows the public's on his side.
Tom, we're almost out of time. Yeah. You write in your very first answer, it was very clear you feel very emotionally invested in this. We talked about the frustration that you reported or felt by the president. But covering this, immersing yourself in this, in a country that you've been bound up with your whole life, I was going to say adult life, but it goes even before then. When you were a very young man, you've written about that. What is this doing to you?
Well, it's the high point of my life, because, I came to Israel, people should recall, I didn't come from Vietnam or Paris or Washington. I came via Beirut. It's tragic to me to see what happened in Lebanon, because I saw that country literally fall apart. And Johnny, why it fell apart? Because there were a group of cynical politicians who said, I can hack away at this. I can hack away at it. And I can hack away at the system. And then when I take over, I'll be a little more responsible once it's mine. And you know what happened? One day, one hammer blow too many, and the whole thing fell apart. And they can't get it back. And that is my concern about Israel. And that is my concern about America. Because my daughter blessed me with a grandson a year and a half ago. And I've made it very clear, and I told President Biden this, and he got it exactly right. I only write about three things today: Trump, Ukraine, and Israel. Because my view is if Israel goes autocratic, if Ukraine goes Putin, and America, chas v'shalom, reelects Donald Trump, the world I want to leave to my grandson will not be here. And so there is nothing more important to me right now than those three stories. And as I've told all my Israeli friends who are worried, let me just assure you about one thing. I am not tired at all. I have all the time in the world for this. And I don't give a flying petunia what anybody says about me. Okay? I know what I'm doing. I know why I'm doing it. And I am not tired.
Tom, first of all, thank you so much for this conversation. And can we send you some peace of mind and some good news for your birthday? I think that is the...
I would love that.
And thank you so much, as always.
My
so
pleasure.
Fascinating. It's such a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, Tom.